Nick has a saying that I've heard probably 1,000,000 times in my lifetime, and I'm going to share it with all of you today. That saying is, operations is everything.
Operations is everything.
Sometimes we just say it back and forth to each other like this. Like, we might be, making a decision about, there was a huge snowstorm in Minnesota this past weekend, like 14 inches of snow fell. There was a 3-hour break in the snowfall, but it was super windy. So snow was blowing and it wasn't exactly safe for our plow truck drivers to be out during that time, but they kind of needed to clear some of the snow because more snow was going to continue to fall. And so we were talking about, ways to prioritize their safety while also prioritizing the safety of the residents living in our buildings and access and all of the things that go with, managing snow clearance for thousands of units in a very snowy climate. And we must have said to each other, operations is everything, 25 times that weekend. So let's dive into that.
We'll be in line at Chick-fil-A and watching how swiftly and courteously they serve the line. We'll just kind of look at each other and say, operations is everything. And it's true. Operations it's the least sexy part of growing a business, and it is by far the most critical thing. When you listen to most podcasts, they'll talk about, oh yeah, we bought this business or this building, or we launched this company or whatever at this multiple with this value, we grew this. But fundamentally, if you can't run it, there's no point in starting it, buying it, growing it. And we were growing very quickly at that time. And we had the privilege to have some pretty world-class training. Elaine, trained at the Mayo Clinic, and I sought out a lot of really incredible, training opportunities. It's kind of interesting, but bachelor's degree in ministry. It's all about serving people and leading a large organization where you have to manage a lot of people. A lot of this concept I learned at the Mayo Clinic, and they have this incredible ability to stroke a check for $1 billion to build a building, launch a whole new field of medicine, buy a proton beam. But they taught me that if you can't operationalize it successfully, not only does it have negative value, but it's a tremendous liability. And for whoever's listening right now, wherever you are on your journey in life or in business, maybe you've got one Airbnb and you're going to 2, or you've got 2 and you're going to 3, and there's something called constraint theory. You can read The Goal by Dr. Eli Goldratt, or The Phoenix Project, or study lean manufacturing and stuff. There's always a constraint. There's always a constraint in your business. It often surprises you. So maybe you've got this rock star cleaner that could handle all of your turns for 1 Airbnb and then 2 Airbnbs. And then when you get to 3, all of a sudden you can't handle it, and things are just kind of falling apart. And that one rock star cleaner, they did okay with 2, but 3 is just too much. You hire a new cleaner and they're not good, and you get rid of them. You hire a new cleaner and they're not good, and you get rid of them. You hire a new cleaner, they're not good, you get rid of them. You're getting bad reviews on your new Airbnb, and you're losing money. And things were going so good when you had 2 Airbnbs and you got 3, and you're just like, how the heck did everything fall apart so damn fast? And I've got great news for you. That's normal. That's a completely normal thing to encounter in business. And so, in that 2022 timeframe, we were growing so fast, and we had to be really, mindful about hiring people. This is something that gets lip service, but your people are truly the only asset that matters. A lot of people, especially in the real estate industry, see payroll as a liability. It's like your number one controllable cost, and we see payroll as an asset. Obviously, we don't want to grow payroll more than we can afford, but your people are the thing that grow your business. And so we had to grow very quickly. The systems that we used to manage our properties when we had 1 unit, 10 units, 100 units, those systems, all of them broke when we had hundreds of units. So just as a comical example, we used to do single day turnovers. So if someone moved out on May 27th, it was an article of discipline that I just drilled into the team, with kind of a fanatical emphasis that someone moves out May 27th, someone's moving in May 28th. We do 1-day turns. Every Marine is a rifleman. Every staff person has, a mop and bucket in their car and can go do a turn and so forth. And when you have a small number of units, that kind of works. It worked really well. It kept our vacancy extremely low. But then all of a sudden we had hundreds of units, and the team is screaming at me, Nick, there is no way. There was a day where we had, I think, 50 turns in the first week of June, which is kind of our peak turnover season. And our team is there's not 50 of us. There is no way, it is not humanly possible for us to go around and clean all these units. And We live in safety culture. Our team is obligated to report problems, and that's one of the best ways for you to find constraints in your operations. And they were shouting at me, Nick, we can't do 1-day turns anymore. In fact, we had to put in a break where there was at least like a 5 business day type time frame to turn over a unit, because there's just so many units that need to get turned. It was no longer logistically feasible. And this is the story of growth. Like, you get all sorts of huge economies of scale as you grow. We're able to get fantastically better pricing on home improvement supplies from Home Depot, but we can't do a 1-day turn anymore. And hopefully the economies of scale that you get exceed the overheads that go with growth. And whatever company you're growing, you are no doubt bumping up against your operational constraints, and that's okay. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that, and you have to be constantly identifying and troubleshooting them. Just in the last 7 days here, we've rolled out a whole new automation system for renewals, because we've got like 700 pending renewals in the next 60 days. And it used to be we had like a renewal officer that kind of managed them, and that's just no longer even remotely feasible. We've grown the portfolio 52% in the last 12 months, which is a lot for a portfolio our size. And so all the systems that worked last year, well, those systems don't work anymore. But the good news is that the obstacle is the way. If you find a way past that constraint, on the other side, it often becomes an incredible strategic advantage. Our new renewal system we rolled out is 10 times better than the previous renewal system we had. It reduced our cost of renewal. It increased our renewal rate and stuff. So whatever journey you're on, whatever growth journey you're on, you have to make sure that you're managing the operations. Operations is everything. And when you do that, you will often be shocked by what you discover, and will create the new strategic capabilities that kind of propel you to the next stage of growth.
Nick and I are somewhat evangelical about operations because, well, operations is everything. And it's certainly a piece that gets far less attention in not just an entrepreneur's life or a real estate investor's life, but even in our own lives as people. We want to focus on, like, say, our goals or milestones or major achievements. Operations is where those things happen, right? So let's say someone has a certain health goal. That's great. And I want you chasing that, and I want you excited about that and invigorated about that and sharing that with as many people as possible. It is going to come to fruition through operations. It is going to come to fruition through things like, what is the exact plan of how I'm going to procure food? What will my eating plan be? How will I get that food? How will I avoid the stumbles when the schedule gets busy or I'm traveling or those sorts of things? All of that is operations. So operations shows up everywhere. It shows up in our personal lives, in our relationships, in our real estate portfolio, in growing a business. And it is where the real value is created. Mm-hmm. And certainly in real estate investing and business circles, masterminds that we've, received tremendous amount of value from, they focus on sexy things like marketing and revenue generation and growth and even hiring, because hiring to some extent is sexy. Like, first you have an executive assistant, then you have a COO, and on and on and on. And there's very little teaching out there about operations. That used to frustrate me so much. I would be just kind of so confused and so frustrated about it. And the story I now tell myself is operations is somewhat specific to different industries and locations and regulation and those sorts of things. And it's also something that to some extent kind of needs to be figured out, individually for certain businesses. And then also it's not as fun. Nick always says, like, it's not sexy, it's not as fun. And so that's why it doesn't come up as much in, say, these masterminds or events. And yet this is our call to you to say, be proud of operations. Operations is where the real value is created. It is absolutely not just okay to focus on operations, but it is what is going to separate you from someone who has a goal and, say, chases that same goal over and over and over and over again, but doesn't exactly get to where you want to get, or worse, is constantly kind of throwing darts at goals and growth, and things are getting worse. Things are falling apart. You're stumbling. You're having a lot of failures. You're missing the mark. If any of that resonates with you, this is our encouragement to hunker down and focus on operations. operations in many ways is harder because it's more concrete, disciplined work. Things like, okay, let's look at this very step by step. Let's come up with a standard operating procedure. Let's test that standard operating procedure. There's always this like push-pull between you want to make sure that your SOP covers the extreme majority of things that might happen, but doesn't get so into the weeds, into the like 1 in 100,000 and 1 in a million type scenarios. Let's say even like that example I gave a few minutes ago about, say, healthful eating. If someone, say, travels internationally for 1 week every couple of years, you probably don't need to put it in your SOP, how you're going to eat when you're taking your one trip abroad every couple of years. You can just kind of figure that one out as you go. You're going to need to just kind of make those decisions on the fly. But if, say, you eat at a restaurant, once a week or a couple of times a month, you absolutely need to make sure that that would be included in your SOP. You need to make sure your team is trained, that there's clarity on it. I am consistently surprised at the things that we might think are common sense, other people don't, or vice versa. Our team might think something is like so hopelessly obvious, and it's maybe not as obvious to us because we're working with an older paradigm, or we're not like in the field the same way they are. So there's these additional steps that for many people feel like drudgery because they are work, and it's holding a lot of pieces of data in the mind and creating that SOP, going back and iterating it, testing it, making sure that it works in the field, making sure that it creates the most amount of value. And then just like Nick said, often as soon as it's kind of working, the system has grown, and then you need to rework it. You need to either refine it or just completely break it and start over. All of that is where the value creation happens. All of that is where the value creation happens. And when you learn to love operations in your personal life, in your wealth, in your finances, in your investing, in your business, in your career, wherever, this literally shows up in every domain of life. You can kind of think of operations in another way of saying it is like disciplined decision making, instead of just consistently making decisions on the fly, but having disciplined decision making. Your life will be better in indescribable ways. And I think we learned that, in our real estate journey so early because we self-managed all the way from our very first property. We self-managed, quite frankly, because we couldn't afford a manager. That property, was just barely cash flowing. And if you pay say a typical 10% of gross monthly rents, well, then we would have been negative cash flow. Plus I had lived in that home. It was just a couple of miles away from where Nick and I were going to live after we got married. So we said, what, we'll just self-manage it for a couple of years and kind of see how that goes. It's just one. And that's where we learned that things like responding very quickly to a leasing inquiry and getting a showing immediately before the other, potential rentals have even called the prospective resident back. That's very important. Handling maintenance tickets in a very timely fashion is important for satisfaction. And it really comes up during renewal time. Like we just kind of learned that whole process. And it was just so solidified to us that the better we operated that property, the exponentially better the financial outcomes. We could get a higher rent in the beginning. We could maintain our maintenance costs as low as possible. And then we were much more likely to get renewals if our residents were happy living there. And we've basically just taken that and multiplied it by a few thousand now. Operations is everything. How can you take that concept and apply it to your business if you're an entrepreneur, to your career if you're working, to your real estate investing portfolio if you're an investor, to your personal life, to your relationships, to your health, to your spirituality? It hits in all domains of life, not just investing, not just business. It hits everywhere in life. How can you operationalize something in your life that right now is just messy and you're kind of flying by the seat of your pants, and maybe you're even like super excited about it, right? This does not need to say that it's an area of your life that there's, struggle. It can be an area of your life that you're super excited about the growth that's happening. When you operationalize it, you will exponentially increase the amount of value that you create.
And I think people often even approach this a little bit backwards, where they'll say, I really want to buy a home services business. I see that's like a hot thing to do right now. And so I'm going to go buy a mud jacking business in Tuscaloosa, and then I'm going to figure out how to run it. And we just kind of facepalm when we see that. And this is like a very fashionable thing to do, and people will celebrate this huge leap in growth and stuff that they're making. And we always encourage people to find their asymmetric advantage. What's something that you can do? Where is an area of your life where you already excel from an operational perspective? And then that becomes your growth trajectory. Like I was just doing a little bit of coaching with someone on buying a property management company. And I basically said, if you're good at it, like the world will pave a path to your door. There is so much demand for high quality property management services. You are the prize. You are the prize here. And why would you buy someone's business when if you're skillful, you can just grow the business with your own competence. Your operational excellence will almost by default grow your business. We brought lawn and snow in-house, bought trucks and power brooms and all kinds of stuff. And within like a couple of snowfalls, people were already reaching out to us saying, "Who's doing your snow? Your snow removal is so good. We're a next door neighbor to one of your properties. Is there any way you could clear our snow?" We never sent out a flyer. We never did anything to grow the business. We just did the business well, and the world paved a path to our door. And we see that over and over again. Really concretely, a couple of frameworks that we think about growth and operationalizing things is you are typically one hire away from taking your life to the next level. You're typically one relationship away from taking your life to the next level, and it's most often a hire, or maybe you have no staff, you have no company right now. Maybe it's a partner, maybe it's a contractor, maybe it's a service provider, maybe it's a private equity fund manager or a real estate broker, mortgage broker, something like that. You are one relationship away from taking your life to the next level. And so Elaine and I are always asking ourselves, who do we need to be in relationship with? Who is the person that we need to find, the person we need to create? When we're hiring for our team, we are always trying to hire based on, kind of culture fit and background. Is this a person who has handled a lot of difficult things in the past and has good communication skills, good customer service skills, good service skills, whatever it is. And we can probably train them in property management. We do things very differently, so it's actually a bit of a liability sometimes, or most of the time when we hire people with previous property management experience. And then we pour into those people. We write down the process that is happening right now. We figure out how to improve that process, and then we have someone take that process over. And it can be something as basic as mowing our lawn. And Elaine gets all the credit for that. She ripped the lawnmower out of my hand, said, "This is ridiculous. You're doing this. Here's who we're going to hire," and they're going to come out and take care of everything. Maybe it's something that's high yield that you think no one else can handle. Well, if you can't write it down and put it into a process, is it truly scalable? Or are you really going to be the thing that holds your company back from growth? And are you going to be that constraint? Do you feel overjoyed to hand this off to someone? We're always hiring, we're always growing, and we train everyone in our team to be constantly improving something, changing the way we operationalize that thing, and then handing it off to someone else who can hopefully make it even better. And then when you hire that person and inevitably they don't do it as well as you'd like them to, or they do it differently, three operative questions that I might leave you with here. If someone's not doing the thing that you need them to do, if your operations are struggling, it's almost always because there's a person not doing the thing the way they need to do it. Is that true, or is that true? And there's just three operative questions to fix any people problem of that sort. So first is, do they know what to do? And we've been doing this a while, and time again, this is the problem 90% of the time, because we're in a place now where our company hires people that we don't even meet. I see someone in a hallway of a building wearing, company branded apparel, and oh, hey, what's your name? When did you join the company? So we have very little control over that training and onboarding process. And hey, we didn't clean this spot in the building. Why not? Well, that person didn't know that was their job. They didn't know that this was an area of responsibility. Or maybe you have an admin and they're doing a great job managing your email, but they're doing a terrible job managing your calendar, and you kind of fume about it and you wonder why balls are getting dropped on your schedule. Well, first you have to make sure that they know that they're supposed to do that thing and give exact parameters for that. Second, if they don't know what it is that they're supposed to do, they often don't know how to do it, or they're missing a tool. Time and time again, like we recently purchased an apartment building, and there's a site manager there who is a very skillful site manager, has been in the business for a decade, and we do everything with paperless, all electronic, and we use our cell phones. Well, the previous management company was all paper, and personal cell phone use was prohibited. Personal cell phone use was prohibited, which I know sounds kind of strange, but they thought of it the way like maybe a hospitality operation or a food service operation would, where you're probably not working if you're on your phone. Well, that doesn't work for us because the whole business runs off your cell phone in our organization. And this person had been with us for 2 months and was struggling with some of our stuff. So I literally sat down shoulder to shoulder with her. And I'm like, can you show me what it looks like when you pull up a keypad code to get into a unit? And she takes out her phone. It's 8 o'clock in the morning, and it's like an iPhone 0 with a cracked screen, and it's got 10% battery. And I'm like, wait, what just happened here? You're not going to be able to get work done on that phone. And she's like, well, I try to use my phone as little as possible. I know cell phone use is prohibited. Personal cell phone use is prohibited. I'm like, no, that's the opposite of our policy. That's a previous policy. And you can't show up to work with a damaged, dead phone that you're not going to get any work done. So she knew what she needed to do. In this case, it was, the most basic thing of accessing a unit and knowing what keypad code to get. And she just didn't have that ability. So first is to make sure they know what to do. Second is you have to make sure that they know how to do it, that they have the tools to do it. And third, and this is the least common problem. Is do they want to do it? Do they want to do it? And part of that is on you as a leader. You need to inspire them and make sure they understand the why their job matters, that thing matters. But a lot of that's on them. So, we do a lot of leasing. It's a sales thing, and you have to do a lot of cold calls, and, you need to be able to make 100 outbound touches a day with enthusiasm, or you're not going to succeed, and you're paid on a commission basis. And only a small percentage of the population, will that ever work for them? There's only a small percentage of the population that can do that kind of body of work and be successful. The ones who can, they are paid extraordinarily well, and that's the case in our organization as well. But most people, they are just never going to have the motivation to do that kind of job. And what we find over and over again as people grow is they focus on, I'm going to go buy that mudjacking business in Tuscaloosa. Then I'm going to figure out how to operationalize it, or worse yet, I'm just going to hire someone who will figure it out. And then things don't go well. And then they just skip to this assumption that person that they've hired to operationalize it isn't motivated. They skip past the what and they skip past the how. And never in the first place did they understand the what or the how themselves. And you end up with really bad outcomes. So throughout 2022 and into 2023, that was one of the toughest growth times in the history of our company. Because there's just so much growth happening. Even though we've had 52% growth here in the last 12 months, we already have enough momentum, enough staff that I don't know. It's easier to absorb. And during that 2022 timeframe, I think we doubled or tripled in a single year. So it was just a furious pace to make sure that we were keeping operations on the rails and getting better every day. And those are just a few frameworks that we use to make it happen. Could not be more happy with our outcomes. They're always getting better. This year I feel like is the year of cleaning. That's something that in the past we've just kind of optimized the expense, and we've done a lot just in the first few months this year of improving cleaning, common area cleaning our properties. Boring, unsexy things that make all the difference in the world to the people that we serve. So
maybe not as fun as our prior episode where we talked about the exuberant launch of our first private equity fund.
Where all the value is, though.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I was going to say. This is where all the value is created. So that's Operations is Everything. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you're getting value out of the Real Estate Real Life podcast, it would be so meaningful for us for you to like, subscribe, leave a 5-star review, share it with a friend who will also get value. We're excited to grow this together. We'll see you in the next episode.